In this video, I want to discuss the motive versus the mechanism of evolution. They are two different things, and one of the reasons is that we have to be very, very careful, especially in science when observations are made. And a lot of scientists and some of the best minds ever seems to have made exactly the same mistake, that they look at an event and observe the sequence of events, and they then confuse the elements that are because of from the despite of reasons. For example, if I just gave you a silly example, are we sending rockets to Mars because we are intelligent, or is it despite the fact that we are very stupid? That kind of thing. Now, one of the reasons I use is, if you look at a fisherman and you're an alien standing there on the shore, you see him, and you don't see the filament, but you see the fish. You could be forgiven for thinking that the fish and the fisherman are mutually attractive to one another, because once the guy has caught the fish and he drags it over, you don't see the filament, and the fish looks like he's actually running towards the fisherman. This is a key step in which, if you've seen any of the previous videos where say the hydrogen atom, the mistake that is made by saying that the negative and positive charges are mutually attractive is a nonsense. They're not. The electron in the orbit of the hydrogen atom is trapped, just like the fisherman here. So that is why mistakes happen when we confuse the motive of something versus the mechanism by which it actually progresses. Nietzsche is not a normal person. You'll have to make up your own mind later on, but I'll keep coming back to him, because this is part of my main reason for this work, is to come up with a universal moral philosophy. And you can't construct that without Nietzsche, because understanding him is vital. Him and of course Socrates. But Nietzsche despite the fact that he is a giant, he has made that mistake, that he sees the motive, he's confused the motive for the mechanism. However, though, Nietzsche is, I can prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt later on when we look at it, that Nietzsche is absolutely wrong. But he's absolutely wrong in the theoretical sense of the word, because he remains right for the foreseeable future, and that is because just because something is theoretically wrong, it doesn't mean that in practice we can do anything about it. For example, our hardware, our mental hardware, is not capable of perceiving the objectivity of the universe. We can only perceive it from our own viewpoint and from our own survival viewpoint. So if we just recap what we've seen so far, the sequence of primary reactions in the universe, or the path of gravity, it begins with the hydrogen atom. This is the first thing in the universe from which everything else comes. We have one electron orbiting the proton, then it forms preferentially, this is the stable state of the hydrogen atom, the hydrogen gas, or the hydrogen molecule H2, where they share these electrons. And of course gravity then this is gravity. This is where gravity originates, because nothing has changed here in terms of the ratios of the two. The hunger here of the proton for the electron on both sides remains the same, and therefore more and more hydrogens congregate, and we have a hydrogen nebula, and then a hydrogen moon, a hydrogen star, and this is where things get completely crazy because of fusion. This is the first alienation step in the complexation of the universe, because it is through fusion that we get photons and neutrons. They are not distinct universal particles as accepted by physicists. They are simply, a photon is simply a modified electron, and the neutron is a modified proton. Why else would it be anything else? It's made from these things, and all of the evidence suggests that they're just slightly modified. But again, please see the videos yourself and make up your own mind. But here we also have atomic speciation, or the atomic Serengeti, because out of this reaction and through fusion we have the formation of other atoms. So basically the mechanism by which the universe propagates is a simple thing. It's that electronic imbalance here. The proton loves the electron wants to be free, and this hunger for the electron, as I showed you before, I'll go back, forms the hydrogen molecule and the hydrogen nebula, etc. Gravity propagates, and then you have a rock, which is fundamentally just a bigger hydrogen atom, because it's just made up of rearrangements of hydrogen atoms, and then you have the moon, and then you have the star, and then the black star in the middle of the galaxy. But my point here is that all of these are relative to one another, either electron rich or proton rich, which means that one is the predator for the other. And this is exactly the same as what happens in the Serengeti, which is what you should expect it to be, because they're made of the same things. So a bigger animal or a predator is proton rich but electron poor relative to its prey. That is what prey is. That is what food is. A source of electrons. That is what we need from the whole thing. So both in terms of looking at the cosmic Serengeti and the real Serengeti, we have the same principle. Again, this is what you should expect it to be. So what is the atomic Serengeti? Again, I'll recap. You have the hydrogen atom goes to deuterium, where the neutron and the proton, which are basically, I think, just two protons covalently bonded in the nucleus, because why would the electron prefer one proton to the other? It forms deuterium, and then deuterium forms helium, and from the helium, etc., etc., more fusion occurs, and then you have things like oxygen and sodium. My point is this: look again at everything here. You have at the center the same principle: protons, 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 proton. Around it, electrons, electrons. So in other words, nothing really changes. Everything is just a different congregation of hydrogen atoms. That is all. That is all what atoms are. So the atomic Serengeti is basically this, and the relationship between them relatively is exactly the same as you would find in the real Serengeti, where animals are either proton rich or electron poor relative to one another, and that is where predation and food comes in. So all bonding is relative gravity, which is again what you should expect it to be. Look again at all forms of bonding. What you have here is the relative distribution of the electrons or protons relative to one another. So in this particular case, this proton congregation seems to be bigger than that, but because they're both satiated, gravitational congregations are quite weak, and they could be things like inert gases in space, where they're not really reactive, but they will still congregate because there's still that attraction or the hunger for electron still remains in the protons. And then you have van der Waals hydrogen bonding, covalent bonding, and then you have the ionic bonding, which is almost complete predation, where the lion rips the zebra apart and takes its electron. So that's total predation there. But as you can see, they're all relative predation anyway. So predation is the only motive in the universe. In other words, the electron slope, which is what I said before, both in terms of the atomic Serengeti and the real Serengeti, this hunger for electron by the proton never changes. But although the motive is predation, symbiosis is an accident. I've already covered this before, and you should see that video if you haven't already, how we get, for example, to this eukaryotic cell. This is a plant cell in which we have the chloroplast, or in the animal cell you have the mitochondria, which used to be two different bacteria. One swallowed the other one but couldn't digest it, and then they became internally symbiotic. So the motive was, guess what? Predation, which is what that was. It's pure gravity. But because something went wrong, it became alienated from its motive, and symbiosis took over. But symbiosis is entirely accidental. Symbiosis does not have a motive on its own. There is no motive in the universe for symbiosis. So symbiosis is an alienation of gravity. It's a mistake. Symbiosis is the mechanism by which life complexes, but it is not a motive. So please remember that. And this is where by now you should be seeing what I mean by Nietzsche. Although Nietzsche is wrong about what he says, and I'll discuss that later when we talk about Nietzsche in the specifics, without the motive of predation there could be no symbiosis. So therefore he is right in the absolute sense that you must have first the motive. If you cannot have the motive, there is no mechanism. So no motive, no action, no alienation, no life. So even though the life complex is through symbiosis, the motive remains pure predation. It's a philosophical digression, just because I'm getting closer and closer to the subject I really wanted to discuss, and all of these are preliminaries for this universal ethical code or moral code. And it's not really a digression, because what we are discussing, if I have it right, if I'm doing it the right way, even though I may be wrong about it, but the principle itself is natural philosophy. We're looking at natural algorithms and looking at their logical path and constructing a logical path which hopefully will be contradiction free. In other words, it may seem right to you, but you will have to make up your own mind from what I'm saying, what you think. The only two giants, as far as I'm concerned, I'm no great scholar, and I'm certainly not a historian of philosophy. I don't want to be. It sounds like a real boring job. It's like sitting there looking at swimmers instead of getting in the sea and swimming yourself, which is what philosophy was intended to be, and invented by this guy here, Socrates. The only two giants where any kind of philosophy, really, because eunomia is the right order of things, so it applies to everything, are these two guys here. I put them in what I would like in scale, in relative scale, but to me, really, I'm so biased here with Socrates that if I put the real scale, he would be gigantic. He wouldn't fit in the screen compared to all these other people, because he's the father of all of these people. They would not exist if he had not existed. Again, you must make up your own mind when you read up on it. You may already know something about him, or you may know a lot more than I do, but these two are indispensable in human intellect if you want to understand right and wrong. There are obviously others, giants. Here's Isaac Newton, Charles Darwin, etc. But they are in the shadows of this man here, because everybody is the child of Socrates. Like Rome, all intellectual roads lead to this man. So Socrates argues for the mechanism of evolution. Don't ask me how he knew it. Well, of course he doesn't argue, because he knew nothing about evolution. But when you look at him later, when we discuss Socrates in detail, you will see exactly what I mean. He argues for the eunomic path, or the right order of things. And you will see that that is exactly an argument for the mechanism of evolution. He understands and feels eunomia as a concept, although he wasn't a scientist. I mean, Jesus, he was 2,500 years before us, when people were dying of simple malnutrition and simple diseases. So he had no insight or views of the universe that we have. Okay, I was primitive and garbage, but it's a hell of a lot more than what he had. What is frightening is how could he see it so damn clearly, or feel it so clearly. And next videos we'll talk about it. So in the sense, Socrates is a psychopath. In the Nietzsche sense of the word, which you will see later what he means, he is a Superman. He is definitely one of Nietzsche's Superman. The person who gives no hoots about anything but what he feels strongly about. I wouldn't say pleasure, because that makes us feel like pigs, but of course our beliefs are strong because we take pleasure out of those beliefs. They're not just random things. You wouldn't select them if they didn't have a value. Everything in the universe, especially for conscious beings, is driven through the mechanism of maximization of pleasure and minimization of pain. There is no other mechanism. But it's not easily apparent, because you have to look in detail to understand the different types of Nietzsche's Superman, or the psychopaths. There is the bright psychopath, and then there's the dark psychopath, which we'll see later. But that was just a bit of digression to sort of whet your appetite. So why am I talking about moral philosophy now and here? Why not just keep going about evolutionary biology and the complexation of life? Well, I really don't have much more to add to the story, because if you look at it detail, it becomes very focused, and it becomes detailed, and you have to then go into genetics and cell biology and zoology and all the rest of it, which I'm not interested in. I'm interested in the broad principles of how life has happened and where it's going, so we can work out for it what is the right way for it to proceed, rather than going into the details of those things. But I still need to clarify some basic fundamental points about life, and these are points mainly things that the mainstream or the experts do not, in my opinion, know about them. I know that sounds arrogant, but make up your own mind once you look at the evidence, because they are way too focused in terms of what they think about, and also they have approached the whole problem through a single discipline, which is their own discipline, and you can't do that because eunomia is a three-dimensional connection of events. So you have to be multidisciplinary, and you have to come at it from all sides, and the most important element, of course, being quantum physics and physics itself. But since there's so much wrong with quantum physics, because if you've looked at it at all, it is the most illogical, well, I wouldn't even call it science anymore, because it's a cult, nonsense that you will ever hear in your life. Most religious texts are infinitely more plausible than what quantum mechanics is telling us. And if you've seen the videos I've told you, I believe they're wrong, because there is a far easier and more straightforward principle that complexes the universe. Anyway, briefly, if you need a complete and systematic explanation of the points that I'm raising here, the videos are little bits and pieces. I apologize, I don't know really how better to do them, because I don't want to bore you to death, but also give you enough to whet your appetite to want to find out more, and to get you to thinking about it, and not to agree with me, but hopefully to excite you, and you might be the guy who finds the real solutions. This book is called Bionomy. It's the second in the series of the Eunomia project, which are 4 books. The first one is Cosmonomy, then Bionomy, then Psychonomy, and Socionomy. And it's free, completely free. I don't want anything from you. I'm not on any social media. I don't want, like I said, anything from you. Don't subscribe, do whatever you want. But make up your own mind, because we live in a time of too much noise. The public platform has been desecrated by idiots spewing malignant kind of opinions designed to just basically create some kind of drama and get them attention. But anyway, I don't have that motive. It's just basically going through the science, which is where I'm kind of interested in. And the reason really is, as per Socrates, if we don't examine our lives, then we are not humans. We're just animals that are accelerated. The unexamined truths are just opinions. Even if they're right, they're just purely accidental, because they mean nothing. And unchallenged establishment are just cults. And a lot of the establishments, especially in my opinion, physics, has turned into a cult. It is no longer science, because people are intimidated by all the Nobel Prize winners, and nobody's questioning the idiotic stuff that they're coming up with. Thanks.